If you came for your first time today, you picked a great day to be here. Now, every Sunday is a great day, but this is especially great. We have Becky Corbin speaking today from the Bail Project. We have Charlie, who has made us some fabulous fixins for after. Yes, 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 I love the backup sounds. Is that Dalton? Thank you, Dalton. We had Suzanne and Megan donate all the meat. Yes. And everyone else did a lot, but I'm still flustered from the baby. So if I forgot, you've all done it. We did it. Wow. We have so many things happening. My new speech is about, just sign up for the newsletter if you kind of want to know what's going on. We have things happening multiple days during the week. Our mat ministry, remember, is now every kind of craft. It is now any kind of crafting. If you have a passion or you don't even know how, it's a great place. It meets every other Tuesday. So anyway, we are so excited about today.
So today we have Becky Corbin from the Bail Project that is going to share about her story and about what she's doing at the Bail Project. And so it's going to be a great day. This day, before I ever come up, it was born out of one of my seminary classes this year, where I was reading a book, and I think it was Shaniqua Walker Barnes' book, and it talked about the Black women's bailout, or the Black mamas bailout. And what they do is they specifically target Black women who are mothers that are in jail only because they don't have bond. That's it. They're not guilty. They haven't gone to trial. They're just sitting in prison or in jail. And a lot of times when that happens, we're talking about some people that are there for as low as $150. I mean, it sounds like no big deal, but it is a big deal for a lot of people. And when that happens, you get caught in the system. And we've talked about the system a lot, right? And so when I was reading that book, I was like, I know there are people. I mean, we incarcerate more women in Oklahoma, right, than any other state. And we have a huge incarceration problem and a retribution problem in this state. Are you with me? And so as the church that claims the way of Jesus, it's like, let us set the prisoner free. Amen. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of Jesus. And so I was thinking, you know what? My project in the class was to meet up with somebody at the Bail Project and bring them to church and tell them about and we were going to raise money and we were going to do this thing. So I wrote the whole project that we've done it, and we haven't done it yet. And so, but that was just the way it is. But the class I took was called Political Pastoral Theology. How can we as a pastor influence our congregation to act in political things that we typically think of as outside of church, right? But they're not. These affect real human beings with the image of God. Amen. And so we hooked up with the Bail Project, and we hooked up with Becky Corbin. And so today is a day that you're going to hear about how we can actually put the Jesus way into action and help people who desperately need it so they won't be caught in the system. Amen. So let me pray, and then I'll bring Becky up and let her just have a great time. Also afterwards, she's got all kinds of information, stickers, buttons. So please make yourself available to those. All right. God, we thank you for this amazing day. And we thank you that when you gave your son to this world, the first thing he said was, today is the day that I set the captive free. And Lord, I pray that we would be like you, and that we would care about those who are hurting and who have been pushed away and marginalized by the system. And I pray that we would be people that could bring hope and restoration and rehabilitation and love and joy into people's lives. In Jesus' powerful name we pray. And everybody said, amen. Give a huge Simplicity welcome to Becky Corbin.
Good morning. Hello. I'm glad to be with you all. My name is Becky Corbin, as I was introduced. That was correct. I do work for the Bailout Project, also correct. And I currently live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was an OKC person. I don't mean to pick sides on that one. I love people in both. Yeah. Well said, Grant. I live in Tulsa with my dog, my pandemic puppy, Winnie. We love Winnie, and I am just glad to be with you all today. And I hope that I can be with you all. And I hope this is a time that we all learn something. If nothing else, you now know my dog's name, and that is a key takeaway. So that could be the one. But ideally, you will learn something about the cash bail system and why it is unjust and what the Bail Project is doing to try and upend that. So myself, I'll give an introduction and kind of background on me first. I was born in San Diego, California, where I did not stay long. I was there until I was about 3. My mom's side of the family was from California. My dad's side was from Oklahoma, and the low cost of living in Oklahoma beat out all of the other benefits California has. So we relocated, and I was in Sapulpa, Oklahoma for some formative years, which is a very small suburb of Tulsa. Not a lot there to see or do, but ultimately the education system in Jinx led our family to move. I am the middle of 3 siblings, so I was around a 3rd grader at the time. My older sister is 3 years older. My little brother is 3 years younger. I'm a very true middle child in every sense, so that may give you a better idea and sense of who I am. But yeah, I had a really unremarkable childhood, and grade school years were very stable for me. I played soccer for years. I was a Girl Scout, marketed those cookies, right? I played the cello. I grew up in a Baptist church, so I like to consider myself a sort of recovering Baptist, as I'm sure I think a lot of you would probably relate. Yes, but generally an unremarkable childhood. I think growing up, I've always had a fascination and love for people. And so I tried to kind of put myself in positions and activities where I would get to be with people and get to know people and just maximize that. I'm an extroverted introvert, as I like to say. So that brings me to high school. Generally speaking, for me, that was when life got kind of complicated. My family life got a little bit messy. A grandparent passed, which sent some mental health spiraling in different family members. And ultimately, my parents went through a complicated, long divorce, and I kind of had to hit the rubber with the road, right, when it comes to faith, which I think a lot of people who grew up in church, that is something that may not happen until you hit college. But for me, I had this earlier moment where it was, okay, is this something I'm going to pursue if it's not something my family is still pursuing? And so that led me into really deep community within church. So for me, again, a love of people was affirmed just in the fact that I found so much meaning and redemption in mentorship relationships and within deep friendships. And church for me was really a safe space. And so were the people that I knew from there. So all of that occurred, got through high school, graduated. OSU was the next step. Not my ideal next step, but we love the Pokes. I was enticed by a full academic scholarship. That is a compelling thing. When you were footing the bill, that's a big selling point. So went off to OSU. Sorry, I think it's my hair bumping your microphone. But while at OSU, since I was footing the bill, I could do what I wanted and change majors 7 times. I wouldn't recommend that. All of them, still, there was a common thread of just a fascination with people amongst all of them. So when I first went there, it was for multimedia journalism. I really wanted to be like the Nat Geo traveling photographer, right? Who got to talk to people and interview them and document interesting stories and people. And OSU's entire multimedia journalism program hinged on sports. And I said, this is not it, pretty fast, which brought me instead into a series of other degrees that were all somewhat related in terms of, again, the involvement with people. I thought maybe I'd be a high school English teacher or a therapist. And I skipped around quite a bit. Generally speaking, college was just a busy time for me socially. I joined a Christian girls sorority where I made friends with our dear friend Shelby. I was very involved in a church that ultimately I worked for 3 years, and had a little bit of church hurt coming out of that because it was not a well-organized and managed organization, really. But that brought me my senior year into another church plant. And I think for me, that's a testament again to this idea of just loving people. And even when an institution like the church had something broken within it, it for me didn't feel like I could throw out the baby with the bathwater in that. And I kind of clung to this idea of like, oh, but what could the church be? And what is this beautiful idea of the church? And what could that look like? And really holding on to that faith and these people that I have so loved and been loved by in the church. So all of that occurred, wound up graduating in 4 years, despite the 7 changes, let us remember, with an honors degree in applied sociology, social services, which meant I also got to do an undergraduate honors thesis. I focused on social capital as it addressed the needs of hunger in a college community. And I got a second bachelor's in Spanish. I don't know how that happened. That doesn't feel right, but I have it on my wall. And then I minored in religious studies because there was a professor that was so dear to me. So I took all of the classes that I could. In terms of faith in that time, I think since high school had been such a pivotal time for me of deciding if this were something I were going to really pursue and dig my heels into, college for me was more looking for affirmations of that in my degree plans and in the education system. And so for me, the hook was really that social capital piece, again, where I was seeing an answer that we are seeing be significant in models of really meeting practical systemic needs, being relationships, and saying consistently, okay, not only do we need to tangibly meet things in an economic way, we also need to provide stable relationships around people. And for me, that was such a testament, again, to the idea of the church and what that looked like. And really for me, in an academic space where there was hefty criticism of the church and the ways that social justice issues and systemic problems had been poorly addressed previously by religious institutions, it was super affirming for myself to hear this idea of like, oh, but social capital, this is what it could be. And what a beautiful idea. So graduated college, we did it. Moved home to Tulsa for a summer where I interned with my home church, Berry Baptist, also in Jinx, which I would liken to Edmond, so a very protected community of students specifically that I was working with, who recently the church had gone through some really hard losses, and we'd had staff members lose spouses and children and just really, really hard things. And so there was a question of suffering now on the table that a lot of them had never really considered. And myself, I hadn't experienced much hardship aside from the instability of high school. I'd grown up incredibly privileged and really insulated in this bubble of a financially secure family and, generally speaking, just a well-off community, right? So for me, that was my introduction to learning how to be with people that were experiencing suffering, but also being willing to embrace the fact that I am not going to have all of the answers to all of the questions that get asked, which is an important lesson. And that prepared me and really set me up, as well as the church's involvement in the foster care world for my first job out of college, which following that summer I moved to good old OKC for. I would manage a mentorship program for young adults aging out of the foster care system. So did that for a few years, got really invested. And really my time in OKC was marked just by intense learning. I went to Frontline here in Oklahoma City, and really I cannot speak highly enough of the people that invested in me at that church, primarily women, who were such testaments to kind of the bedrock of the nonprofit sector in OKC. I feel like I would need multiple hands really to count the number of incredible women leading the way in that space. And they've taught me a lot, and I am very much a testament to them. But they really uplifted for me this idea and this integration of faith into work for me of Loving your neighbor and even loving your enemy as well means also disrupting systems of harm that are impacting them. And so it moved from just this specific one-on-one relational context to this bigger picture for me of it's important that I understand these bigger systemic problems too, and pursue writing those things as a means of love. So that was a very quick summary of that. Now we're to Tulsa. Moved back in June of 2020, a famously great time for everyone. It was a lot. I hung out with one person and her child for a year of my life and really got comfortable on my couch, as I think we all did. I moved to Tulsa because I got a job opportunity with the Bail Project. The lead-in from foster care to criminal justice space, as Israel touched on, was really just observing mass incarceration in our state and seeing the impact that the carceral system was having on young adults in the system, not only as a cause for why they'd entered the system because a parent or a caregiver had been incarcerated, but also seeing a lot of these young adults aging out of the system and ending up incarcerated themselves. And for me, moving away from foster care to criminal justice felt like a hopeful move and more trying to direct at the source what change can occur there. So Tulsa, I currently live on my friend's goat farm. It's been glorious. Work for the Bail Project. Got Winnie, my trusty pandemic dog. I go to an Anglican church right now, which is new for me. The liturgical stuff is a fun time. I think faith has been an interesting thing during the pandemic because there's no real normalcy to the rhythms of life, right? And so for me, that's been an interesting development. But hopefully I can talk you all through really practically cash bail, right? The thing you actually asked me here to talk about. And then with that, how the TVP responds, and hopefully somewhere in there, there's some integration of the faith piece for me. Also, I'm currently working on my master's degree, which is hardly worth mentioning because I'm moving at a snail's pace, but it is with the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. It's in social justice and community action, which sounds made up. It really does, and it's not. So yes, absolutely. Okay. So criminal justice work for me, the lead-in was foster care and just being a witness to that and having an empathy for the young adults I was serving and seeing the impact that it had on them. Again, I grew up incredibly privileged and insulated from the impact of our carceral system. I didn't know anyone that was incarcerated. My family wasn't impacted by that system. And even now when I'm given opportunities to educate, I have this hesitancy because I know that I am not going to be someone that can speak to it on a personal way, given that I am not an impacted person. I think I also have the ability to educate people and uplift these things in a way that feels sort of like a responsibility, but also another way of loving the community and getting to carry some of the weight of the system being as unjust as it is, and saving someone that is impacted from having to do that heavy lifting on their own. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you all about it. I took so many notes, which is very me. So I'm going to try and make sure I cover all of the bits and pieces to hopefully answer all of the wonderful questions you submitted about the bail system. I'll touch on briefly, in addition to working for the Bail Project, I also work for Death Penalty Action, which is an organization working to nationally end the death penalty. I'm their innocence claims campaign coordinator. My introduction to that is also a credit to an incredible woman, previously Oklahoma City, CC Jones Davis. She was, yeah, I know, all the applause for her. She tried to recruit me for the Julius Jones campaign full-time, and I wound up doing part-time work with her, and then left for Tulsa, which was my blunder. But that was really, again, an opportunity for me to be educated and learn about something that I had been so insulated from. And I know you all have learned about the death penalty previously, so I am not going to beat that horse, but it's been a really cool opportunity to get to be a part of that work, and also a really sweet full circle redemptive arc for me, given that I started at university with this intention to do storytelling and journalism and all of this. And now my job is to tell people's stories and help convey their innocence claims. And most recently, I was a part of the Free Melissa Lucio campaign, and she got to stay on her execution this week and woke up this morning. Big deal. Yeah, big deal. So The Bail Project, the thing you all want to hear about. I have been with them for almost 2 years now, and I've had 2 different positions within the organization. The first is a client advocate or bail disruptor. Bail disruptor feels a little less accessible to most people. I had never before held a job title with the word disruptor in it. So client advocate feels like the correct terminology to use with you all. I'm also going to try and steer clear of too much jargon about this, and hopefully if there's a word that comes up that is not accessible, you will let me know. But the bail system. So imagine that you have been charged with a crime and you get arrested. Regardless of what it is, a judge has to decide based on what you've been charged with and the circumstances you were arrested under, if you are deemed releasable, essentially. So they have to decide, do we need to detain you while we decide whether or not you did the thing you're charged with, or could you go home? And if they decide you could go home, the judge has made that decision. It is up to their jurisdiction and decision making. But if they decide that, they are meant to set a bail amount. Bail, in this case, is just collateral for coming back to court. It is meant to incentivize someone coming back for their court dates. As long as someone goes to court, they are meant to get that bail amount back whenever their case closes, regardless of what the disposition is. So they could be charged with the thing and convicted of it, and they would still get bail money returns to them as long as you go to court. So this bail incentive, it's meant to be affordable. It is meant to be accessible and an amount that a judge could say, how much can you afford? Great, that is the amount. That way you will have that incentive to come back for your court dates moving forward. That amount, and also whether or not bail is even set, again, is subjective based on the judge. The problem with this system is that it is subjective, and also it only works if you have money. So the bottleneck here is that individuals that don't have that money essentially are put into this subsector of our justice system. And so it kind of has created this dichotomy in justice systems between those who are wealthy and have the ability to afford their own bail and to post or pay a bondsman and go home and fairly fight their case from a point of freedom, because at this point they are innocent and have not been proven guilty, right? Their case could be dismissed. The alternative is sitting in jail indefinitely, waiting on court dates, more likely to take a plea deal, just as out of desperation to return home because you are poor. And we know this is a problem because at this point, 50 to 90% of the population in any given jail is individuals being held pretrial, which on any given night amounts to about 500,000 people sitting in jail pretrial across the US. So it's a lot of people. I want to touch again, the presumption of innocence thing comes up quite a bit in the language we use as an organization. And I think for a lot of people, it's compelling because without that being one of the bedrocks of our justice system, there is this great liability to all of us having the potential to be thrown in jail without proof of us having committed a crime. And so this presumption of innocence is pretty pivotal for everyone to have an opportunity to experience the justice system as a just system. So without it, people are sitting in pretrial custody and suffering the effects of long-term incarceration, even though they may not have done what they were accused of. Their case could very well be dismissed, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, we also know that the bail system as it exists now is not inherently just based on who it is impacting. So we see that it's having a much greater impact on Black and brown people as compared to white people. Individuals with the exact same identical charges are receiving higher bail amounts, which creates then a much higher population that are being detained pre-trial who are suffering the effects of being away from their job, right? Being removed from their family, which means kids could enter the system, which is what got me into this work, right? But additionally, all of the side effects of just being removed from your life and having your life disrupted by incarceration. Yes, so our model, will kind of shift now, our model with the Bail Project, recognizing all of these things within the bail system, which again, was not meant to detain people pre-trial like this. It was meant to be accessible, it was meant to be affordable for all of these people that a judge has already deemed is fit to be released. They just financially need to put forth that incentive to return to court. That system, we recognized was not functioning correctly as it should. And so around 2017, 2018, we were able to get funding from the Audacious Project, which is a portion of TED Talks. If you have never seen Robin Steinberg, our founder's TED Talk, she is phenomenal. She explained the whole thing and received funding to launch a national bail fund, the model of which is meant to be a revolving bail fund. So since bail is just that collateral that you'll go to court, as long as you show up for court, that bail money is returned, which means we as an organization are willing to post bail on behalf of our clients at no cost to them. So rather than them needing to post money to a bondsman, which is a 10% amount of the total bond that they would never get back, that is now the profit of the bondsman, or posting their entire bond and waiting for their court case to wrap up so they could get that money back, we will actually post the entire bond amount on our own dollar. We then, once they have been released, we'll work with them to ensure they have the means to get back for their court dates. So we provide transportation help, reminders. The court system as it exists doesn't have the capacity or is unwilling to really provide that kind of support, which also unfortunately incentivizes people not going to court, losing that bail money, which ultimately goes back into the court system itself. So that's kind of created an interesting circular effect there. But we are able to provide that support piece. And also our model is pretty dependent upon this idea of community release with support. So that means as an alternative to incarcerating someone, releasing them back into a situation where potentially they are in crisis, which has led to that incarceration, we are able to interrupt with some community support system. So it's all client-led. We don't force anyone as a condition of their release to participate in anything they don't want to, but we work with someone to say, hey, are there any needs you have that we can help address or connect you to resources for? So we want to try and do that as best we can as well. At this point, 90%, it's over 90% of our cases are closing successfully, which means even without the monetary incentive that we are deeming necessary within the bail system, people are still coming back to court. Even though it's not their money on the table, even though they're not at stake to lose that money, they're showing up for court. So the goal is to ultimately prove this point on a much larger systemic level and ultimately see the system itself change and move away from cash bail to just be community release with support and integrate in these community services as an alternative to pretrial incarceration entirely. We're a sunsetting organization, which means we all want to lose our jobs eventually, which is a funny thing. I've been a part of interviews recently, and that is a funny thing to convey to someone who wants a job. But yeah, the goal is to ultimately put ourselves out of business and remove the need for bail funds entirely. Yeah, so my role within all of this has been first as a client advocate, bail disruptor, if you will. That was my first position within the organization. I worked directly receiving referrals from the community and from very desperate family members who were financially not able to pay bail amounts, or attorneys who recognized that their clients were in this position to potentially accept a plea deal because our justice system doesn't have the ability to correctly take all 500,000 people that are stuck pre-trial quickly through the court system. And so as a result, they rely heavily on people just taking plea deals so they can go home. So attorneys will sometimes recognize this person needs another opportunity to fight this case fairly. To do so, they need to be home. So we will get referrals. We're in about 25 to 30 sites across the US at this point. So we're here in OKC. We're also in Tulsa. We go through an internal decision-making process, which I will more thoroughly address the questions you all sent. But essentially the question that stands at any given time is, since bail has been deemed acceptable by a judge at that point, that means they are deemed fit to be released. Based on our model, do we feel like we responsibly have the means to support them if we were to bail them out? Do we feel like we have a means to communicate about upcoming court dates and connect them to community services? What services are available? What opportunity do we have to really support them? We also work through, these babies are living life and I love it. Yeah. But really provide that ongoing support through the duration of their court case, which as a client advocate in just a year and a half, just in Tulsa, the people I was able to identify and qualify was a little under 280 people, which is shocking because I had no idea this was even necessary prior to this. And so for me, it just proved to be yet another privileged blind spot that I was not cognizant of being relevant for so many people. And these are just the people we were able to bail out. They're individuals that unfortunately there's not services to support. Moving forward from that though, I think one of the big reasons that we see so many people detained pre-trial that kind of moved me as a relatively empathetic Enneagram 2 type person was just seeing the way that the jail was trying to address things that the jail cannot address. So a lot of the clients I got to work with in the year and a half that I was in this position were individuals that had really specific needs, like a public health need, for instance. So they were experiencing substance dependency, or they were having a mental health crisis, or they were chronically houseless, and they were in a situation where they kept getting caught with trespassing charges because they were trying to find somewhere to sleep. All of these things that we cannot jail ourselves out of. These are all problems that are not solved by pretrial incarceration. In fact, they make those things worse typically. So for me, recognizing that kind of further to me motivated me to find ways to try and continue this work and hopefully help educate others on it. In November, I moved into a position as a staff trainer, which means I'm no longer on the front lines of this work. I get to be just like a slight step removed. I think given the 280 people that I was able to bail out, I felt very affirmed in my continued fascination with people, obviously, but also from that, C.S. Lewis has this idea that there are no ordinary people, and it's not his idea, but he wrote it. So this beautiful thought though that like everyone is someone essentially, and there aren't small people. And I think for me, walking into a facility on a weekly basis where about 1,500 people were being warehoused was just a reminder to me, as I got to know the individuals that were being held and detained unjustly, of all things too, was that there's not really a godforsaken space out there. And all of those people were very much spoke to that for myself. That brings me to your questions. So hopefully you feel like you have a basic understanding of the bail system as it stands, the Bail Project's response to it, what I have done in the midst of all of this for the Bail Project. The questions you submitted were great. I combined a few of them because they were very similar. All of you had similar questions, which is excellent. So hopefully I answer them. The first was, what response has there been from police and government to the Bail Project's mission? This is a tricky one to answer. Yeah, so we're in 25 to 30 locations across the US, which means we have a wealth of experiences with a wealth of key players in different places. There are both sides of the aisle involvement. There are no monoliths when it comes to the consideration of what local government looks like across the US. So it varies is not the best answer, but one I'm going to elaborate on. I think some jail admin and local leaders really recognize the value in depopulating overcrowded jails, because they recognize that, especially given a pandemic, that posed a massive threat to the individuals and their safety that were being detained. It also costs a lot of money. So practically speaking, there's a monetary incentive to reducing that jail population, which again, if you recall, 50 to 90% of any given jail is just people being detained pre-trial because they cannot afford their bail. So helping reduce that kind of incentivizes people playing well with us, if you will. Some of the difficulties we face is that the bail bonds industry is a really profitable system. And so I kind of touched on this, but any bondsman requires 10% roughly of any bond amount that's posed. So if someone has a $5,000 bond, for instance, you pay a bondsman $500, they will pay the entire amount up front, they pocket that $500. So long as you go to court, they get all of that money back, they get the full $5,000 back, and now they've profited the 10%. We all move on with our lives. If you don't go to court and you forfeit that bond amount, that is when Dog the Bounty Hunter comes knocking on your door and says, where is that $4,500? The trouble is that, again, individuals don't necessarily have that $5,000, or they would have posted it themselves. So they end up taking really heinous opportunities. And I've heard of bondsmen going into homes and saying like, okay, if you write over your son's Xbox to us, that counts as collateral in your car and your house and all of these things that really shouldn't be on the table as bargaining tools in what should be an affordable cash bail system. We have seen sites already experience this change to a different model as an alternative to cash bail. So we do know that there are key players that are very much siding with us on this and recognizing as well this cash bail system is not working as it should. So in terms of government response, we've already seen bail reform in New York City, which was actually one of our founding sites. The Bronx Freedom Fund, which has a much cooler name than you would expect. They were one of our initial projects that Robin Steinberg, our founder, began when she was a public defender. And as an agency, the public defenders would actually bail out their clients who were in this position. And so that model became the Bail Project on a much bigger scale. But again, there were mixed reviews to it because it was taking away from these other systems that were profitable to others. I think though the greatest pushback always comes from people not understanding how bail works and what bail is and what we do. So there's some criticism that potentially bailing people out will make our community less safe. And I would argue all of the people that work for the Bail Project care about the safety of our communities because we are also living in them. So that's something where, again, people don't seem to understand that we are only bailing out clients that have been deemed eligible to be bailed out by a judge. So no one we're bailing out has been deemed unfit for bail. They've all had a low bail amount set by a judge who has reviewed their case. So that is all to say. The next question you had was, what is the most ridiculous charge you have seen? Or have you seen, I know, or have you seen a pattern of charges within the individuals you serve? Both excellent questions. I think there is a level of absurdity to the system itself that makes a lot of charges ridiculous given the context. I had a client that was charged with stealing a pack of cigarettes and their bond was set at $1,500. So things like that in itself, like petty larceny, to be made so inaccessible. If you can't afford a pack of cigarettes, what are the chances you could afford a $1,500 bond to improve the situation? Things like that just seem particularly absurd. We also see, I would say more so a pattern of charges when we review an individual's circumstances and the cases that they have had over time, because they can indicate a bigger crisis that we can understand as being related to a public health issue or an issue of poverty or an issue of mental health. We have individuals that pretty evidently have been houseless for some time because they have public indecency charges from peeing under bridges, or they have a trespassing charge because they're trying to find somewhere safe to sleep. We see a lot of substance dependency come up and a lot of drug possession charges, abuses of alcohol, DUIs, things like that. And that forms a pattern typically on someone's record where you can identify this is a crisis, this is not something that is solved by putting them in jail. And that also feels a little absurd of us to try and resolve things that way, and particularly unfair to the people working within the criminal justice system who don't have the bandwidth then to address things that would be an issue of public safety because they do not have the ability or the margin to solve all of these problems that we are tasking them with. Those poverty charges came up quite a bit. The mental health stuff came up quite a bit. Yeah. So the second to last question, sorry, that you all asked was how we choose clients. Is there any application process? Could anyone qualify? And how do we ultimately select who we do bail out? Because if you remember, the 280 ballpark people that I was able to serve are not all of the people I had touch points with, right? So I would reiterate again that the individuals we are reviewing for this and potentially posting bail for are all individuals that have already been cleared for bail by a judge. They've been deemed fit to return to society for the duration of their court case. That has been decided by someone else, and it is at that point up to them. In terms of who we are working with, though, we are working with people that the system has been biased against because they don't have wealth. So really who we're choosing from are individuals that don't have the ability to hire a bondsman anyway, and they also don't have the ability to post bond on their own regard. So we do have a referral form online. Like I said, desperate family members and friends who don't have the financial ability to post bail will send us those referrals. Community partners, we also have a lot of attorneys that will send us referrals. Sometimes individuals that are in custody will reach out. I got a lot of weird phone calls, but all kinds of ways people will find connection points to us, which really comes down to trying to make ourselves as accessible as possible, because we recognize the individuals we serve are more than likely lacking resources, and so we're trying to find ways to intersect and be available. Once we receive that referral, we walk through that internal decision-making process where as a team, we'll collaboratively decide, do we have the ability to responsibly get this person out and get them back to court? Not only does missing court cost you the bail amount, it also will likely create a warrant for your arrest again. And so it just recreates this recidivism and this new problem for a person to navigate, which we don't want. So we want to make sure we're responsibly getting feedback from the individual as well, that incarceration is never a good alternative, right? But we also don't want to feed into this problem by getting someone out and not having any of the things that they've identified that they need and not having the ability to support them for their court case. There's also a consideration of charges. However, we are charge agnostic. So there is not a charge that will at face value ever disqualify someone. When I say we consider charges, it's more so looking for those patterns and being able to identify, is this a crisis situation where someone really needs support greater than potentially what's even available within our community? So we have to take into consideration what's already been done in the community, what's on the table, and what availability there is. Sometimes there's no beds, sometimes a program is overbooked for years. So we take that into consideration as well. But we really want to see the person in front of us as a whole person and more than just potentially what could have been the worst moment of their life or the worst decision they ever made. That matters. And as a believer, that matters to me, and maintaining that human dignity and holding the line there. Yes. So the last factor we'd consider is really the amount of the bond. Since we are a nonprofit organization, we do have somewhat limited resources in that capacity. We typically serve $5,000 or less as a total bond amount, which again, if you recall with a bondsman, 10% of that would be $500 or less, being the difference between someone sitting in custody potentially for months, in some jurisdictions over a year, just waiting to appear before a judge to even decide if they're guilty of the thing they've been charged with, or going home and continuing their life. So typically it's $5,000 or less, and ideally, again, it's a revolving fund. As long as we do our jobs and get our clients back to court, we will get that money back. It goes right back into our system, and then we use it again to get the next person out. So as long as we continue with the trend of over 90% of our cases doing that, we are sustainable, and we can see the mission through and hopefully sunset across the US and see comprehensive bail reform. Besides the financial piece, your last question was, what are other ways to serve this population and how could I volunteer? Great question. This is also where I hope to kind of make some ties to faith, as a good recovering Baptist should. I would say the absolute biggest thing you can do at any point is to be educated about this and to understand how the system works, what the system's failings are, and what we are doing about it. I know for myself, growing up very privileged, it was very hard for me to learn about this until I was working with individuals that were subject to it. And for me, that was a massive wake-up call to the need, and also to the ways that I had just kind of assumed really that you don't want the time, don't do the crime idea. I just sort of had assumed that maybe the criminal justice system was functioning the way it should. I didn't know that it was not. So making sure to integrate into your life spaces where there are these voices of people both being impacted by the system and working within it, to really upend these injustices. And then using your influence within your community and your social circle to make that clear to others and be able to say, hey, this is something I learned about. Did you know this? For me, that's also tackling how we as a society define crime itself and being able to call into question when we're arresting people for things that are issues of public health or issues of mental health or poverty or whatever else. I think championing local community services and resources is also a big deal. So we can't do our model without that community support. So being able to advocate for funding for local resources that address things like public health and poverty and houselessness and all of this. Those are all critical to this model working and also to human thriving, generally speaking. And so finding ways to uplift that within your community and context. I would also say, as a person of faith, speaking to a body of people, I found that making uplifting justice and really embracing hard conversations within faith settings, especially in a state like Oklahoma, part of my practices of my faith, really pivotal. There's an MLK quote I come back to all the time as someone that does not like conflict, which is that peace is not the absence of tension, but it's the presence of justice. And so this idea that I need to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations for the sake of uplifting others and potentially benefiting others and the common good in that. And understanding why something is wrong, not just as an affront to a system, but to individuals and to human dignity, right? In the midst of that. And coming back to that idea that there aren't ordinary people and all of the lives matter, all 1,500 sitting in David L. Moss on any given night in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And for me, my last point would be just building your theology around a gospel that is comprehensively good news. So that includes individuals sitting in custody, right? And I think of at the beginning of Jesus's ministry in Luke 4, he's in Nazareth in the synagogue and he quotes Isaiah 61, this prophetic word about being the good news and coming on behalf of the poor and the incarcerated and all of these people, and recognizing that that means good news for everyone. And it's not just people that are in privilege. And for me, I think that also ties to in Acts 4, whenever they talk about the early church and what a beautiful model for community that social capital is, right? Where they had everything in common. There wasn't a need among them. No one was going to be sitting in jail pre-trial. There wasn't going to be a need for that. So those are all of my 7 pages of notes. Thank you for listening to that. Yeah.
Give Becky another hand and thank her for being here today. Awesome. Just so great. Thank you so much. What we want to do, Simplicity, if you're watching this today live or if you see it later. So what we want to do is we have the red bucket that we put out. And what we want to do is we always kind of just give to other things that are around the city or globally that we're giving to that are doing ministry, that are helping people. All right. And we're probably going to take a while with this one. I would like to spend a little bit of time with the Bail Project and raise money. Now, one of the things that Becky said was that they have a pretty high rate of success, about 90%. So some of you are already doing math and you're just like, okay, well, if they have money and 90% of the people are doing it, they get that money back. So they're able to use that money again, which is what she said. And so some of you are already like, well, that's pretty good return. So maybe we shouldn't have to give a whole lot because there's a lot of people that are already having success with this and they're getting their money back and they're doing it again. Well, here's the problem. She said within the year that they worked, so she worked with that, there was about 280 people. What if they had more money? What if they had more resources? What if they had more? Are you with me? Sometimes more is more. Amen. I mean, literally, sometimes if they had $10,000 to provide for two $5,000 bail people, that's two. But if they only have 5,000 and we're saying, well, they get that 5,000 back 90% of the time. Well, that's really bad thinking. The point is that there are a lot of people. She said 50 to 90% of the people are really just sitting waiting, and they're getting caught and trapped. From what I understand in my research on this is that the longer you're in the system, the harder it is to get out. Okay? The longer you sit in there and you're enculturated into the system, and let's not be naive. The incarceral system is making tons of money on all kinds of different ancillary types of businesses, not just prisons. There are private prisons also that are literally for profit. So they make money if there's people in the jail cells. Are you with me? Their job is not to get people out. Their job is to keep more people in. The bail bonds, the cash bail project is a money-making thing that is making money off of the justice system, which is so crazy. It's like so absurd that we call it that, and literally it's so unjust. So what I would love to do is literally give so much money that we're just bailing people out constantly, that all of these other things that are making ancillary money off of incarcerated people will just go out of business. That's the first thing. The second thing is what she said. We have got to start doing things that are creating businesses or ministries, if you will, around rehabilitation. Hello, let there be light. And someone's like, dude, shut up, let's eat. All right. I know, I heard you. But are you with me? Like, there's ancillary things that are making money. Let's create ministries that are surviving off of helping people get healthy and helping people have lives. There's a unbelievably horrible story. It is an incredible documentary. I would encourage every of you to watch it if you haven't, about Khalif Browder. Khalif Browder is a kid that was, I think in high school, maybe just out. And he was in New York City, and he was picked up for stealing a backpack that literally he never even had in his possession. But as a young black man, he was picked up. He was sent to Rikers. If you know anything about prisons, he was sent to Rikers, and the only reason he was sent to Rikers is because he couldn't make bail. I think bail for him was like $2,500, maybe $5,000. But he couldn't. He was a poor black kid. He went to Rikers for 3 years. For 3 years because of cash bail. He got out finally because people found out about it, and they pushed the system, and they finally released him. And after about 2 years or so of being out, he committed suicide. And the reason why is because he was so locked into the system that threw him away for nothing. And so I can't sit here and hear about people being in prison or in jail or locked up because they stole some cigarettes. I'm sorry, I can't. Like I was like, dude, just give them the cigarettes. I don't even care at this point. You can absorb it in your stupid little 7-Eleven. Like you know what I'm saying? Like we got other issues in this world where people are dying. And so instead of having a retributive type of system, we need to have a rehabilitation and a peace system. Amen? Where we love these people, although the dignity of every human matters because of the image of God. Amen?